Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to Red Hat Live Streaming. I'm joined by some of my friends here at IBM, or here, there, wherever they are in IBM. But today we're talking about Cofferco to Racial Justice and the Truth Loop project. I swear I cannot say that right the first time for some reason. My tongue is too big for my mouth or something. So sorry. So I'm Chris Short, host of Red Hat Live Streaming. Sabine, you are?
Yeah, the product manager for Cofferco for Racial Justice, which encompasses 7 projects, and Truth Loop being one of them. Yeah, so I can pick up from here, Chris, if we're ready to go.
Feel free.
Awesome. Yeah, so I have amazing folks joining me on the call today, primarily and really only the Truth Loop team, who actually were the kind of founding team members to help build up the solution from inception to what is going to be, what is available in the open source space today. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of context around, Cofferco for Racial Justice, if this is the first time that you're watching with us, and then we're going to lead into some conversations and displays from the Truth Loop team on the solution. Context around Cofferco for Racial Justice. It is a project that lives under David Clark cause, and Cofferco lives under David Clark cause, and IBM really supports as a technical partner in that respect. And so Cofferco for Racial Justice started back in June of last year due to the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, many others that we know have died at the hands of excessive policing and police violence. And so with that as the inspiration for Cofferco for Racial Justice, we've really identified 3 pillars that we wanted to develop open source projects around that can speak to more of the systemic inequities that exist within our society at this point, and not really to solve for it, but to address the different ways in which technology can play a role and a strong part. So we have policy and legislation reform, we have diverse representation, and we have police judicial reform and accountability. And Truth Loop falls within policy and legislation reform. And again, just giving you a timeline of where we were, and again, to update this to like where we are now, we would need a much longer line or even maybe smaller points on this timeline to say that we've made so much progress with the teams. We've had so much feedback from the community of experts who are able to validate where Truth Loop is going, but also being able to recognize that as an open source project, we really were using building blocks that would be available to all in order for them to build out their own instance of Truth Loop and eventually be able to adopt this as their ways of working. Just giving some context again, all of these teams have presented, with Truth Loop being the last one in this mini series. So you were able to hear from Fair Change in this application that allows you to record police incidents primarily for research and education purposes, to Take Two, where you're able to detect bias in text media and opportunities for AI and machine learning growth there. From Five Fifths Voter 2, who also is focused on being, a one-stop shop for people who want to understand their voting rights. And so just giving, a quick overview on that's what, our current solutions look like. But right now we are going to focus and hone in specifically on Truth Loop. And I'm going to hand this over to Sharon, who is the product lead for Truth Loop. And just tell me when to move to the next slide, Sharon.
Sure, will do. Thank you, Sabine. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So as Sabine mentioned, my name is Sharon. I'm Sharon Ossahon. I'm currently a strategy consultant within IBM's Global Business Solutions, but on the Core for Code project for Truth Loop, I'm the product manager. And I'm joined today by some of my other team members. We've got Frank, who's our kind of data SME, we've got Mark, who's one of our developers, and we've got Henry, who is one of our developer advocates. And so in essence, who we are as Truth Loop is just a group of developers, of user research, UX designers, and SMEs who got together to want to try and tackle one of the problems within the policy and legislation areas. And So I think in terms of why we got involved, I think there are probably two key reasons we all got involved. The first one is, in essence, that we just want to do what we can to help. This is a huge, enormous problem that needs solving, and my opinion on it is that every little thing that we each do individually can very much add up to move this problem along. And we should it was just an opportunity for us all to do something and contribute towards ending racial injustice. And I think the second reason some of us got involved was also just the opportunity to very much expand our skill set. So as mentioned, in my day job, I'm a strategy consultant, but on Call for Code, I got to be a product manager, which is an area that I've been really, really keen to get into, and definitely gave me the opportunity to explore that. And I think the same is true for especially some of our developers who needed extra experience, and real life hands-on experience developing, both back-end and front-end code for the solution. So that's a little bit about us and why we got involved. So now it'd be great to just jump into TruthLoop itself. So in essence, we were trying to tackle two main problem statements. The first is that concerned and impacted residents of a country, which is pretty much any one of us, don't have a straightforward way of knowing which policies and pieces of legislation could affect them and how they might be impacted by them. And finally, they don't know what they can do in response. And then on the other side, we also have residents, but particularly lawmakers, who struggle to identify implicit bias within policies that have, either currently in existence or are being proposed. And that makes it really difficult to assess any potential negative impacts that this could have on policies. So, to sum up, I guess the problem we were trying to solve it's that many residents don't know how a policy will affect them, and sometimes neither do policymakers. So, next slide, please. So in order to tackle this, we obviously had to try and learn more about the problem space and also learn more about our potential future users. And so we did a bunch of user research. And in essence, what we wanted to know is, first of all, how do people currently learn about government policies and legislation? And the second thing we wanted to know is, what type of content would drive their learning? What are they curious about? What's going to get them excited about learning more about legislation? And so what we did is we conducted a survey to capture feedback on people's opinions, feelings, and experiences with learning about legislation. Next slide, please. So what we learned, I think we had three main sort of insights that we gained. The first was that people learn about legislation through the news, and then also social media, in essence. And I think we can probably all very much relate to that. That this is how we learn about lots of things really in life, but especially legislation. And then the second thing we discovered was that learning about the impact that a piece of legislation could have on someone was identified as the most important sort of information to learn about for users. And then we also wanted to kind of pinpoint maybe a few topics that people would be most interested in learning about, especially because that's kind of how we, started thinking about, what to populate the solution with, what exactly to, what kind of information to give people access to. And so what surfaced was that people cared very much about civil rights and liberties, health, and education. So those were the top three policy issues that were identified. And
I have a question, Sharon.
yeah, sure.
When you all kind of reviewed, this survey, was anything really surprising to you when it came back and you were able to even see, some of the top policy issues that they wanted you to focus on, or any other insights?
So I think what was surprising to me, well, I'll explain why the other two weren't. So it wasn't surprising to me that people wanted to, I guess, learn about civil rights, health, education, because those are all very relevant and sort of routine parts of our lives. It did actually, in some ways, surprise me that people learned about legislation on social media, just because I kind of think I don't see social media as like the place to learn about things like that. It's more sort of like fun, entertainment, fashion. I mean, I do follow like tech and science accounts, and I suppose that there are, it's true though that there are accounts, advocacy accounts, and people, I guess, lobbying for legislation, but it's just because that's not necessarily how I used it, especially not until the murder of George Floyd, which then, social media was really put to very, very good use there. Until then, I hadn't really come across too much legislative content on there, so that in a way surprised me. But that's just me. I don't know if anybody else from the team has anything to add to that. But yeah, and actually, I'd say one more thing. It made sense to me that impact would be the most important thing about learning about legislation, because I guess that's the way in which it's relevant to you. But it was nice, I guess, to have people really like be able to define and crystallize that for themselves and say, yeah, actually, if I knew how something impacted me, then I might be more engaged. So I guess what was surprising was also people's awareness of their interaction with legislation, especially when they're not usually, when they don't usually interact with it. So yeah. Yep, happy to move on. Cool. So based on the research, but also loads and loads of design thinking sessions, we fleshed out two main personas. The first is really just any regular person, politically non-savvy resident of a country who doesn't know how to go about educating themselves when it comes to legislation. And they also are not sure how to engage really, or what they can do to impact, what they can do to impact policies, but also how policies impact them. And so I mentioned earlier a few of the user research insights that we gathered there, but then we also conducted lots of interviews with lobbyists and people who are involved in the policymaking process, people who engage with government officials who, I suppose, push for certain legislation to be implemented. And so to define their persona, we've got the policymaker on the right. And a policymaker is interested in local issues and impact. They want positive outcomes for their constituents, and they're also interested naturally in re-election. I think something interesting we found there is that they're influenced by personal relationships and experiences, media coverage of issues, and their staff. And some of the key user research insights we gathered were that they are very keen to connect and engage with constituents. They are compelled by personal stories, and of course, they don't have a lot of time. Next slide. So based on that, we synthesized all of that information, came up with some ideas, and yeah, that's how Truth Loop was born. And so in essence, Truth Loop is an application that allows users to explore current and proposed legislation, and we want to make sure that we're doing that in a bite-sized, jargon-free format that's really easy to digest to help them to increase their legal awareness. And the second aspect of the solution is that it allows users to share their personal stories of how legislation has impacted them. And they can do that by recording short videos in which they can describe their experience. This can then be shared with, other people and also policymakers. Next slide, please. And so the outcome that we hope this will have is, one, for the members of the Black community specifically, we want them to be able to understand the specific impact of proposed legislation on them without having to be legal experts. And again, we want them to share their opinions so that they can share their opinions and personal stories so that they can influence some of the policy decisions before they're finalized. And then for policymakers, as well as allies of the Black community and other residents, we want to, with our solution, hopefully give them visibility into how the Black community will be impacted by proposed policy. And then just to touch on the last group very quickly, there are, of course, advocacy groups as well that we hope will use our solution to, I guess, advocate on behalf of the Black community. In essence, I'll let Frank talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but yeah, in essence, we just want to give people visibility into the daily challenges of the Black community and just create this feedback loop between residents and policymakers to, get to a stage where we're creating progressive policies together. So yeah, with that, I'll just hand over to Frank to talk a little bit more about the advocacy group side of things.
Yes,
Sure.
thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you're right. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And yes, touching on the advocacy group and allies, I think what's been fascinating about the developments over the past 18 months since the untimely death of George Floyd is that there was a really significant amount of support across all communities, people from all walks of life. And that was even commented upon by many people in the Black community. And I think that's one of the big changes, because I think people, are aware of constitutional principles of equality and lawful principles of being treated equally. But I think people were in advocacy groups and allies were standing up saying, the systems have to change, whether it's policing, whatever the infrastructures are that have previously let us down. I mean, people from all walks of life have been very loud in advocating for this change. And I think that's been one of the, if there's any modest positives coming out of this, I think it's one of those sort of earth-shattering moments when the world really is changing. Because I'm based in the United Kingdom, as is Sharon and as is Henry on this call. And this is a massive issue here. And there have been marches across Westminster Bridge to Parliament Square, standing in front of parliamentarians with shirts that say Black Lives Matter from people who are, from all walks of life. So this is a global phenomenon that I think is reaching all four corners of the globe and really all walks of life. And I just wanted to make that clear, because I think we understand that, but in what Truth Loop can achieve and can assist that ambition.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Frank and Sharon. To also kind of, emphasize really how a lot of thought, leadership, and validation went into kind of the approach and the scope of Truth Loop. Wanted to also talk about how we were really intentional about getting, feedback from, lobbyists, like, Sharon mentioned, as well as, other people who are in that subject matter expertise space. And so they even, engaged around a design thinking workshop over 2 days, sat down with the teams, were able to, understand like what the intent was for the solution, opportunities for the future. And again, I think that really lends itself to this being community oriented. And allowing people to use their skill set wherever it is, to inform on what could be different opportunities for them to engage. So it looks like, having someone who typically wasn't a product manager step into that role and really lead this work with a lot of finesse and a lot of expertise that I think was really innate to Sharon's ability, as well as the subject matter experts who are in the room who maybe didn't understand technology all too much, but understood their line of work enough to inform how we could be able to move forward, or different ideas that we could explore. So just really wanted to hone on that. Because again, this is really focused on how do we get this code from, GitHub into the communities where they can get their hands on it and start using this actively. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to to Sharon to go ahead and demonstrate Truthly and how it could be used.
Okie dokie. Thanks, Sabine. Can everyone see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Cool. So this is, what Truthly looks like at the minute in terms of like the first kind of screen that you see. You can either kind of explore policies or tap into my testimonials, which are the name that we're giving the short videos through which people can kind of share their experiences. So if somebody clicks on explore, our landing page here presents the user with, I guess, the ability to kind of just say where you're located to get policies that are relevant to your area, as well as any categories, being able to select from categories that they're interested in. And then, we'll then return like a list of policies that kind of, with the location and category filters applied, or they also have the option down here to just scroll through a list of categories that they can explore. But I'll just, with this demo, demonstrate the option to search for policies at the top here. So you can select a couple locations and categories and then search. And then the search results return the relevant policies here, as well as relevant video testimonials of users telling their stories further down here. And so when a user clicks on the policy, they can see the policy summary here, as well as some additional details at the bottom to do with, the policy sponsors, who came up with them, as well as kind of discovering a couple of related policies. And then finally, if user feels as though they understand this and they've actually been impacted in a similar way or in some way by this policy, they can either choose to tell their story and record a video, or they can look at other people's testimonials, and clicking on that testimonials tab, so it leads the user to this, we hope, very intuitive series of videos that they can swipe through, kind of like an Instagram story format. And then underneath the video, you can see the policies associated with the testimonial and any relevant advocacy groups that users can get involved in. And again, the prompt here to go off and record their story if they want to do that. So yeah, very quick demo of what we're aiming for.
Perfect.
That's awesome.
I'll go ahead and reshare my screen. So now we're going to go a little bit. Well, actually, do you want to share your screen, Mark? Just because I know that you're going to end up leading a few more points around the technology, but I'm happy to also, keep my screen up.
Go ahead, keep your screen up until you hand it over to me, I guess.
Yep. All right. So handing it over to you now.
Oh, okay. Then in that case, all right, I'll talk to this and then I'll share my screen.
Okay.
So first of all, how did I get involved in this? I guess I thought I might as well volunteer. what I'm doing here, I'm a developer. I've never been that great about, raising my voice and even getting out and volunteering as much as I should. But in this case, I've always thought the causes are great and call for code. So I contributed just a little bit of my time on another project that we didn't continue with. And then I was asked to come in and help put together this solution after the initial team had their story and their design figured out. And, I wanted to volunteer that because I think probably there are a lot of developers out there like me where we're not necessarily great at using our voice and standing up for what we want to stand up for. But something we can do a lot of is we can contribute code and put these things together and build a solution. So I was really grateful I got a chance to do that, but also working with this team, they're very inspiring every time I got together and talked to them because they're really motivated and really care. And I was really glad to lend my skills to help put this together. So what we did put together is shown here in the technology architecture. Let me see, hopefully my pointer works a little bit. So if you look at this, what Sharon showed is sort of from the left point of view, you use the app to run the solution. I tend to look at it from the right side, from right to left. First of all, we needed a database to store all these things that we're tracking, the legislation, the advocacy groups, the officials, what location does it affect, all those things that are relevant that you might filter on. And in particular, that's where the summaries go in. So the idea here is we're not just pulling maybe a policy out of a site, but it's being put into plain language that people will understand. So it's very much a database application. The Node.js application, there's an Express app that serves that up and provides endpoints where we can populate that database, store those videos, and serve everything up that the app needs to do its work. Now we can run this on IBM Cloud, but we could also run it on OpenShift on any cloud. And we provided some instructions to do that. I think most of our instructions make it easiest to go with the IBM Cloud, but Postgres database is open source and you can run it anywhere. And our Node.js server, you would typically run it on your laptop if you're a developer. So you can get this up and running pretty easily. For the video storage, we started out with Watson Media. So you have a production ready store to keep those videos. One of the things we're very anxious to do is have a very simple file storage or open source, content manager hold that for us. So we could use some help there. Ultimately in production, if anybody wants to use a different video storage or even a different database, it's something us developers can make happen. But we're looking for guidance there on where to invest. And the last part of the picture then over on the left is the application. So we're using a web app. So it should look great on a phone. It should look great on your desktop browser. We started with Vue Js to build our app, but we've already built a React version of that, which is pretty much ready for us to make the switch over to React.js. And the migration to React, I think the main thing there is we wanted to get more developers involved. And right now, if developers want to help us out with React, or if they're interested in learning React, we've got some developers helping us right now that can help show you how to do that and how to do that the right way with testing, with the design, with the layout of the React app. So let me switch over. I can show you the code and where it lives and how we put these things together. Okay, I should be sharing my screen now.
Yep.
So the Truth Loop tutorial is here on developer.ibm.com under tutorials Truth Loop. And this is where we publish the page. And you'll see a lot of what we've talked about as far as why it's here and how you can go through and run this on your own. The architecture diagram is what I just showed you. But behind this tutorial is also a public GitHub repo. So I'll switch over to that right now. So this is where the code lives, and external developers can join in and contribute. So I'll walk through the code in a minute, but first I thought I'd show you that we have issues. We have plenty of work here. Some of it's been tagged for Hacktoberfest, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. Some of it, if you look down, we've got labels for good first issue. If you're looking for your first chance to contribute to an open source project, maybe Hacktoberfest, but just to get started, you can come in and look for these good first issues. And for some of our bigger ideas, these design thinking sessions where, as Sharon talked about earlier, some thought has gone into, what are our goals? What would we like to do? These have been tagged from the design thinking sessions. So we have a lot of issues to work on here. We have some active pull requests going on right now with the conversion to React.js. I want to thank some of the contributors recently. Ed and Juan in particular have contributed to that React migration. So let's go ahead and look at the code and how that's laid out. So if you look at our GitHub repo, first of all, the README is very much like the tutorial, but it will go through and walk you through the problem, the idea, the architecture, and how to get started. And the video is another demo. So if we get down to it, you'll see as the diagram showed, first thing you need to set up a database. And we're using Postgres right now. You can follow the instructions with IBM Cloud, or you can really spin up Postgres anywhere. Essentially what it's telling you is at some point we need the credentials to tell the app how to connect to the database. Watson Media is a similar setup. Again, if you're using Watson Media, you'll need that ID, that secret, to allow the app to connect to it. Running the server then is very simple. So as we typically do with an Express Node.js server, most of our servers, you use the environment to share the credentials to connect to the backend database and Watson Media. And typically you're running locally, we just put that in a .env file. I'll show you that in a second. But what the app does is it loads the .env into your environment. So here we'll give you an example where you can set your username password in the .env file. But if you're running on OpenShift, it's the same thing. You want to set that in your environment. Typically you'd set that in secrets to assign to your workload, or sometimes config maps if they're not as, it's not as secure. But basically your environment knows your credentials, your environment knows where your database is and how to connect and how to store your videos. So this describes how to set that up, get you running. PSQL is how we set up the database itself. Let's see if I can get through this before my voice leaves. So here, I'll jump back to the code to show you these scripts in a minute. But we have scripts to set up the database, create the tables. You can even load some dummy data. Once we're running, I'll show you we have a server directory where you run the server. It's typical Node.js. We just use npm start, and it's up and running. Through the server, you can get at really three things. One, there's the REST API, and we have a Swagger implementation so you can see the whole API and all the endpoints and exercise them. A second thing is there's an admin UI where if you don't want to use the REST endpoints or SQL directly to feed the database with the policies and the officials and the locations, we do have a UI you can use, just fill in the forms for that. And last but not least is the client. So we can run our client as a developer, but in production, you can also do a static build of it, and this server will serve up that UI. So the server can run those three things, and you can also split it up and make it scale if you want. So I'll show you that in a second. But just to complete the README, it gives you an idea what the Swagger UI and all the REST endpoints look like. It gives you information about how, as a developer, you would configure and run the client. So you can run this client, and we even have a way you can run it standalone with mock data. So as a developer, you can go through, and if you're just tweaking the UI presentation of this, you don't need the whole database, the backend, et cetera. But at some point, you'll want to put it together. So I'll show you that in a second. And we even have some instructions. So if you're not up and running on IBM Cloud or with an OpenShift cluster, we can help you get it running on Docker. And with just an open source Postgres database that can run on Docker as well. So you'll find more information here about how to contribute. But like I said, it's an open source project. It should be pretty much what you're used to if you're in open source at all. So I'll walk you through the code a little bit, just doing a time check. And also, if Henry, if you wanted to add anything to the overview, you can jump in.
Yeah, while you're getting the code set up, I mean, I just want to echo what you said earlier, actually, which is, many developers, feel, want to get engaged, but it's not obvious often how. With the advent of the technologies we have available, the build pipelines, the code, the open source, I mean, it's now really easy to really have an impact. And I think we all felt that as part of this project and the other Cofferco projects we've been involved with. And it really is remarkable how quickly you can feel yourself, really having an impact on a problem like this. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's my pitch, if you like, to other developers that get involved, is that, if you feel motivated by this and you have developer skills or the other technology skills you need, UX design or whatever it happens to be, or documentation and so forth, then the open source route, and especially we power this on OpenShift, so you can, it has a great reach across almost any cloud. Then this really is a great way to get involved. And so, we all felt that as part of this project, and I would encourage others to do the same.
Yes, exactly. Because I was very inspired working on this, and it's gratifying as well. Not only do I get to feel like I'm contributing to a great cause when the people that design this give me their stories about why they're doing it, but they also really appreciate when they're not coders, we come in and throw some code together and they think we're doing the magic part. We're really not. I tell them that this part's simple. You give us a good vision, it's a simple matter of coding. But it's still, they're grateful, and it makes me feel very good I could lend to the cause. So if we want to look at what we've built here, this is the picture, the high level picture of the database. So we have this legislative artifacts, whatever policies or things we're talking about. And if you saw in the demo, you probably noticed they're tied to, I'm looking here, the officials were these legislators, who sponsored it, who's backing it, what advocacy groups, oops, sorry, I clicked. Here we go. What advocacy groups are backing it? What's the status of it? Is it proposed? Is it passed? Categories for filtering. This geospatial definition is a location. Is it a policy that applies to a state, a county, a country? So this is the database as it's at a high level. More specifically, when we look at the data model, it gets a little more complicated. Basically, there are a lot of these links here because this legislation is in one or more categories, and the categories affect one or more pieces of legislation. So most of these are because of many-to-many relationships, but you'll see the database, it spreads out a little bit. But then when we start working with it, most of these are fairly simple to deal with. So if I go back to the code, so I went into the server directory, if I didn't mention that. And this is where we do have a simple Express server, a server.js and an app.js. It spins up the server. And what the server does is it provides routes. So we have a route directory, and these are the REST endpoints. For example, advocacy groups. We need endpoints to get the advocacy groups. We need an endpoint to post. You can get a specific one or all of them. You can post when you're creating a new one. You can do a put when you're updating it. So this is your basic endpoint for create, read, update, delete of an entity. So we have a bunch of these for all these entities that we care about: officials, advocacy groups, legislative artifacts, and then also the links that tie them together. If we look at the database, you'll see then something very similar. We've implemented the database that backs up these routes. So if you're doing the get and the put, the create, read, update, delete of advocacy groups, well, this is how we tie it to the database. They go in and we do the select, we do the inserts, we do the updates. So we have these for all these entities. So you end up with an application that has REST endpoints, is backed by a database, and most of that is fairly simple to work on. And what we end up implementing is one, the database I just showed you, but the other is the REST endpoints to access these. So the server provides those endpoints, and this is Swagger, which is a great tool because it exposes all these endpoints. Where I showed you we have advocacy groups, you can get them all, or you can get a specific one. Sorry about the scrolling, sometimes that looks bad. You can get a specific one by hitting this endpoint with a specific ID. You can post a new one, you can update an existing one. And the way Swagger works is you can actually execute these right here in the UI. One, it's self-documenting, but it's also a tool you can use. You can use Postman. You can write code in pretty much any language to use these endpoints. So this is really the bulk of what the server does. And then also some of that feeding videos to Watson Media, which I wasn't really prepared to show, but.
And people people watching may have noticed we use inline Swagger documentation to get this populated. So when Mark was showing the code earlier, you'd have seen the comment block ahead of each endpoint, which is how this gets generated. So there isn't a separate Swagger document that you have to keep up to date, which we think is good practice.
Yep. So it's really great. It's kind of self-documenting code in that way. This describes, we create an endpoint to get advocacy groups, and it's self-documenting as well. It's integrated with Postgres. We could certainly open that up to make it work with multiple databases if we found the need. So that's the main thing. Oh yeah, the other thing in the database. So I mentioned how the Node.js code works with the database and provides the routes. I probably should have, in the order, showed we also have the database set up here. And the way we do that is we have SQL, like this is the SQL. This is the simple one. If you don't already have a database that you're using to create a database, using this basically variable for database name. We have the more interesting one. Sorry. That's what I thought I clicked on. The more interesting one that creates all the tables with all the constraints and integrity needed to tie these entities together. And we've provided scripts. So if you want to just connect to your database and create these, I think this is the simple one. You might already have a database, but the simple one is this script will just read in your environment, your .env, to have that username, password, find your database and connect. Use those environment variables to connect to it. Run PSQL and pass in that database name. And this was that file we just looked at that says create a database by that name. Similarly, if you want to create all the tables, just a simple script says, here's how we're going to connect with our secrets, connect to the database, and run all that SQL that creates all those tables with all that referential integrity. So I think, oh yeah, so on the server side, that's pretty much covers it. We've got our database, we can create it. We've got routes, you can access it via REST. The other thing I should jump back and show you is the client. So if I go up a level, there are really 3 different clients right now. Under the server, if you want to use the admin UI, that lives here under server admin. And this is, Zoom gets in my way here, but we do have currently a Vue.js admin UI where you can add advocacy groups. You fill out the form and add it. You can list, I don't have any right now, but it's a table where you can search, edit, delete, list all the different entities we care about. And I'm pretty sure we're going to convert this. Actually, we already started converting this to React.js. So we've got a lot of good work to do there if you want to get your hands in on React.js development. And the client, the one we really demoed that end users all care about is that the Vue.js one currently lives here under the client directory. And see, we have mock data. We've got the source. It's your typical Vue.js client. So you just run that as a developer. You can do npm run serve to build it for production. You can build it, and then we commit that so the server will run that version. And of course, lint. But we've converted to React. I hope I'm not scrolling too much. I know sometimes that if you have low bandwidth, it's going to look terrible. But we've done the same thing now under React client, and we'll be probably moving that shortly so that the React client is our main one. But here you see we have a very similar thing. We've done some good design work around how to do it with Redux, with components, with good separation and testing. But again, it's a Node.js project, run npm start. You can build the static version, the server will build it. We'll serve that up. And basically it's got its source, it's got its public directory. It looks like your normal React product with the components and its own routes and store. So this you can develop on your own as a front-end developer, but like I said, we can connect it to the server, the database. You can do the full stack as well. And I think that probably pretty much completes the amount of time I should be talking about this. I hope I showed you enough to know you can jump in and contribute here, front end, back end, full stack. We definitely have a lot of issues to work on and things to complete that vision.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that, I mean, you covered a lot. And I think that especially for this audience, being able to give them a breadth of opportunities to understand where they can get involved. The current setup is, equally as important as, talking about the background and how the design framework that we put in place. So definitely welcomed you talking through this way better than I could. All right, so I will go ahead and grab the screen back and talk, actually just handing this back over to Frank, I believe, to again, talk a little bit more in depth around, how PI was really observed as something to really protect, and then, the approach that Truth Loop wanted in this case.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Sabine. I really just wanted to provide what we call a data map so that anyone who wants to get involved understands that we've addressed how personal information would be managed within Truth Loop, and that we understand the sources of the PI and the entry points into the system, and then ultimately where it's going to be stored. And Mark touched on that. It could be an IBM Cloud, doesn't have to be. It could be IBM Watson as well. And then who has access to the personal information, this possibly legislators and policymakers, officials, advocacy groups. The data subjects themselves may want to be looking at things as well as media, social media, and some IBM admin. We provide some examples of the personal information. So it'd be the name, a pseudonym, possibly an email address, and some other images such as photograph or video images or social media account, and even metadata. And that we're addressing, like, for example, where the storage would be. One of the things that we have to all be mindful of is that the follow the sun approach. So if it is in a cloud, it may be in a variety of different places around the world, and that we have addressed that, and would be working with our partners to make certain that privacy notices are issued, and that we know where the data is being stored, and that we're dealing with all of the various privacy, obligations, whether they be in North America or externally. So just wanted to highlight that without going into too much detail, that we've done a lot of work in considering the PI issues with Truth Loop, and we're very much on top of that. And still, as you can see with things highlighted in yellow within this particular map, that there's still issues that we would have to determine with our partners. But we're very much looking forward to doing that, is making certain that if somebody wants to use the Truth Loop app, that they're going to do so lawfully regarding their personal information being used.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks so much, Frank. Mark, did you want to cover this? I know that Sharon also had to, step away shortly, but just talking about, you talked a little bit to the work that is currently available for people to get involved with, but even some progress that we've made in the project itself.
Sure. Yeah. So we have the working back end. We have the working front end. We've been finding some things during the migration where, as the components were built separately, we weren't always connecting everything as much as we wanted to. But most of what was demoed has been built. We're definitely been trying to work on that, making it easier to upload a video, making sure that is fully functional, but also we'd like to be able to plug in easier places to store videos if you don't have access to Watson Media. We proposed using other databases. I don't know if we're going to continue with that. But one of the biggest things we have right now is the conversion to React, which I think has been very successful in getting more people involved, and a great learning opportunity in how to use React and use it the right way, with test-driven development as well. And then we've talked about how people will upload the legislation, whether they want to use our admin UI going forward. We can do more design thinking on that as well, or whether they'll feed it directly with REST endpoints or database scripts. So you can view the legislative artifacts, set them up. You can record your own videos. We have work to do on sharing the videos. I think we want to document better probably how to deploy this on OpenShift. I have to double check that, but it's certainly set up, and we were doing that in the past. So we have work to do there. And I think in particular, there are the easier tasks that we've highlighted for people that want to get started and contribute, but the design thinking has more ideas that we have not pursued, as far as, is the language simple enough? What's the sentiment behind it? Should we be dealing with comments and evaluating them and things like that? So there are a lot of bigger ideas and smaller ideas as well up there on our issues lists.
Awesome. And I think that we have some questions
Yes.
from the folks watching.
So I'm trying to go scroll back up here. Let's see. Okay. Has there been any major challenges in migrating to React?
I would say no, it's gone really well. So I think one of the great things about migrating to React, I have nothing against Vue Js. This was my second Vue Js project, and it's new and it's interesting. Mm-hmm. I think the main benefit was to get more people involved. We moved to React, and that was very successful because we have a developer that's really taken the lead there and is not only getting a lot of work done and very involved, but is helping us do it the right way. So I've done a little React as well, but learning how to do it the right way is a benefit to me. And we're also guiding newer developers who are coming in and trying to help and set that up, not only get the React conversion working, but then looking at it and saying, well, we really should separate it so that this part of the code works only with the Redux store or only via routes and isn't, doing the kind of the amateur way of accessing other parts of the code that it shouldn't. So we're getting some great help there and doing it the right way.
Nice. What kind of support can a newbie get if they're interested in joining the project? Which reminds me, I need to drop that link in chat.
So first of all, I think what I just mentioned, if you're going to help on the React conversion, we have a developer, a volunteer who's coming in and helping, and he's willing to do like some pair programming, sharing screens, helping people get started, so that he doesn't write all that migration himself, but is there to help mentor people that want to do it. I feel a little uncomfortable volunteering him to do that, but he's volunteered himself. So hopefully that's going to work out great and good opportunity for someone that wants to join. I can help with that as well. I'm not as good at doing React the right way. I just kind of make things work. Right. But on the database end, on the server end, I'm quite familiar with a lot of that. So when it comes to putting things together and explaining why things might not be where you think they are, I can go help debug and show you how to do it, how to get it up and running.
And what's also helpful, like in the GitHub, we actually mark what are some good first issues for someone to get started with. That can be either if you just want to get started with the project, or if you want to be able to develop your skill set, being able to, kind of filter based on those tags can be a start. But then we're also going to talk a little bit about Hacktoberfest, which is really, again, aimed at getting developers with all sorts of skill sets being able to support these projects. And we have an active community, like Demi is in there, Upkar is in there, and the rest of the team here. So if you're having, any critical issues, you can find help from, the team, the resident team, but then the open source community, who again may not be working on something explicitly, but can again help you debug and understand a path forward.
And if you're brand new to open source, you really should learn Git, which is a hurdle. It's not intuitive, but everyone uses it. And I would say you really shouldn't come to us and say, teach me Git. But after you've learned, you've taken the intros and you kind of feel like you're ready to get started, people on this project can definitely help you. It's going to be your first PR, your first fork. You might get lost and we can help you with that. So pick an easy thing to do and we can help you through it.
Nice. Awesome. That's it for questions, I think. I dropped the link. And anything else, Sabine?
Yeah, so I know that we also talked we were kind of coming back to the ways that you can get involved, and I think we just answered a few questions, especially on how you can get started, and even going through some of the current issues that are open, and short-term goals, long-term goals, other ways for you to get involved if maybe you're not as technical, or if there's something that you maybe not feel as confident in. We have a range of ways for you to get involved. And I really do want to, I know that we're kind of winding down on time, but, again, access the GitHub, connect to the link that Chris just dropped in the chat, so you can see, how to get started with GitHub and being able to see what the project is about, and being able to see, where you want to actually get started. And to that effect, we have a way you can get started right now today. So Hacktoberfest is one of the largest kind of open source hacking events that happen in the month of October. So we've partnered with Hacktoberfest to invite developers from around the world to devote their time and skill set to some of the projects that we believe could be great starts for them, could use, a little bit of extra expertise, or if people want to challenge themselves, there are opportunities for them to be able to do that through participating in Hacktoberfest. And we are kicking this off on October 6th at 5 p.m. Eastern time. You can go ahead and follow this short link, ibm.biz/Hacktobercc, and understand how you can get involved, not just in this project Truth Loop, but how you can expand your skill set and your opportunities around all of the Cofferco for racial justice solutions. So just keeping this up a little bit more so you can, get that link there, and really welcome. Oh, perfect. So you can go ahead and register and prepare to engage there. We'll also be available, in our external community, which is, Slack, to answer questions. So you can always @ me, you can @ Demi, and Upkar here, as well as, the team on this call to help you through any processes or difficulties that you're going through. We're here to be unblockers.
Nice.
And so, yeah, that's what I want to say. I wanted to say thank you so much to the team who is here on the call. We did have one extra announced just to talk about, again, we talk about code to community and being able to give people access to our technology. And we are, actually announcing today that 5/5 Voter was announced as a collaborator with YMCA of Metropolitan LA, so that they can get some assistance with marginalized people being able to access their ability and their rights to vote. So just announced that, super excited. And we know that Truth Loop is, really being fortified so that it can support efforts like this. And we know that the work that YMCA is doing is really in parallel also with, policy and legislation. So there's just all tons of opportunity for growth there. And I'm really excited to see how this project has evolved. And those are all of the things. Thanks so much to the team. I didn't know if they had any parting words before we close out the call.
Come get involved. There's lots of work to do, and you'll learn a bunch of stuff, and it will be for a great cause. So come help.
Yeah. And I would just add that some of the most extraordinary people that I've had the privilege of working with in my entire life have been on Call for Code. And some of the most talented people have said one thing to me over and over again: why we're doing this is we really are going to change the world.
Exactly.
Love it.
That's awesome.
All right. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you all. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Stay tuned for Red Hat Advanced Cluster Management Presents coming up next. Thank you again, Sabine, Demi, everybody. Appreciate all the work you've been doing. This has been a great mini series. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Take care. All right. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.